Welcome to Capital Insight. I'm State Representative Kevin Mannix from Salem, and I'm your host for this program, which is designed to give all of us a little more insight about what goes on around our state capitol, particularly involving the political figures and the government figures, and also how the public interacts with them in our community as we try to make policy on behalf of all citizens. Our guest today is a gentleman who is in his first term in the Oregon House of Representatives, having just been elected last November, Representative Brian Johnston from Salem.
Hi, Kevin.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
What we like to do on the show is to get some idea of who you are as a person and then talk in general terms about your impressions and that sort of thing. But maybe you can give us some idea, as if you were in a job interview, what would you tell me about your background in terms of who is Brian Johnston?
That's an evolving question. I grew up in Chicago, and I went to law school in Chicago, and I came out to Oregon and started practicing here in Salem and then teaching at Willamette Law School. And I taught there both as a part-time and then as a full-time professor for 13 years. While at Willamette, I developed into a field called dispute resolution, and then I left Willamette in '91 to just concentrate on that as a career. And that's ultimately what drew me into your world, into the political world, because I really thought that some of those skills might be equally appropriate in the environment that you and I now work in.
Can you tell us a little bit about your family? I know you have a wife and kids.
I married a wonderful woman who's a native Oregonian. Ann Unger, grew up in Redmond, Oregon, went to University of Portland, and then graduated from the Oregon Health Sciences University. She and I have 3 children, a 5th grader, a 3rd grader, and a preschooler. And we've always lived in Salem. We met here in Salem, and we're in our 3rd house. This time we're out near Sprague High School. And Ann is the only daughter in a family of 5 children, and so she has 2 older brothers and 2 younger brothers. My family is much smaller. My mother passed away when I was in high school. She had been the raising parent. She and my father split up when I was 9, and then so right after my junior year, my mother passed away that summer, and I was faced with the alternatives of either living with my sister, who had just gotten married. I have a sister and a brother than myself, living either with my sister or going to live with my dad. But my dad lived about 60 miles northwest of Chicago, so
you would have had
world.
to change schools too.
Yeah, change schools and a whole other world. So I moved in with my sister and her new husband and new baby for that senior year, and then I went away to college and basically stayed there. I graduated from college in 3 years because I was able to take summer session.
Well, what was your work career like after college?
Well, I had a great time. One of the things I did at college was I was on a teacher scholarship, and it was an Illinois state scholarship program. You committed yourself that you would teach for 2 years after college at a high school or grammar school in Illinois. And so I taught it on the south side of Chicago for 2 years and taught high school English. And during that time, I had never had any thought of law school, but interestingly enough, a professor at my undergraduate college had suggested that I consider it. And during the 2 years that I was teaching, I started thinking more and more about it, and so I started applying to law schools. So after I had fulfilled my 2-year commitment to teaching, I went into Loyola Law School in Chicago, a Jesuit school, and graduated from there in '75. I took a job in a Vista Program, Volunteers in Service to America. Worked at the Legal Assistance Program of Chicago at 47th and Martin Luther King Jr. Drive.
Well, now, how long were you there in the Vista Program?
It was just short of a year. I was there for about 11 months, and I have to be. There was a Vista Program in the office, and there was 12 attorneys and 6 Vista spots. So I wasn't technically in Vista, but I was in the Vista Program. We received all of us received the same salary, which was a whopping $120 a month. And we look back at it now and you think, how did you do that? You know, but it was fine. It was a wonderful experience. After I did that, as I say, I left in about the 11th month of the program, and I joined the Public Defender's Office at Cook County, and I stayed there for just about 2 years before I came out to Oregon.
Now, exactly where did you meet Ann?
One of the things, this is strange, one of the ways that I supported myself in college and law school was I used to write the programs, the physical programs for marching bands and drum and bugle corps. And how I originally came to Oregon was in the summer of '74, I was asked to write for the Salem Drum and Bugle Corps. And I had accepted 3 jobs that summer, one writing for a drum corps in New Orleans, Louisiana, one writing for a marching band in Pensacola, Florida, and then I accepted the Salem, Oregon program, and that was the Flamingos. And I accepted that one because I said, I have to go to law school this summer, I need the credits, and we worked out a deal where I could come up here, spend the summer with those kids, and go to U of O's law school for the summer. So I did, and where this is all leading, when I came out here in the fall of '78, one of the people who was on staff worked at a dental office, and Ann was the dental hygienist at that office. So that's how it happened.
It's amazing how these things all come to pass.
Yeah, you know, there's that Robert Frost poem about the road not taken, and one of the lines in there is, knowing how way leads on to way, and that's exactly what happens.
Oh, great. Now, do you have any particular family interests that you focus on? I don't want to pry too much, but I'm just curious as to what you may find interesting to do as a family.
Well, we've had because my family is primarily in Illinois, although my brother now lives in Denver, we've traveled quite a bit together as a family, and we have a great time. Every summer we're on the road for at least 2 or 3 weeks, and probably twice. Why I say twice is for about the last 5 years, I've taught every summer at Pepperdine Law School in Malibu, and we tend to drive down there, take our time going down, take our time coming back. And I like that. I suppose there'll come a point where the kids will be tired of it, but you know, with my oldest being 10, it hasn't happened yet. But that kind of family togetherness, living on the road and seeing things, is just a lot of fun. I like being together in that respect.
Now, you mentioned teaching at Pepperdine during the summer. Is that something you think you'll be able to do this upcoming summer in '95?
I turn to you for guidance on this. To what extent would you trust the dates that are being bandied about as possible exit dates?
I think that the way we're going right now, that mid-June would be very realistic. Mm-hmm. Early June is a possibility, so is late June, but mid-June is probably a good target.
Well, I've turned down the Pepperdine folks for this summer, and the other offer I've had is from Hamlin Law School in St. Paul, Minnesota, the same sort of thing. And they want to do it in July, so maybe I'll take theirs.
Oh, I think you can make it. If we're in session in July, we're in deep trouble this time around. There were special reasons perhaps last time, although they weren't very good reasons in my mind, why we ran on till August 7th, which is the longest session ever. And of course, I should probably mention that we're talking about the legislative session and what we're doing right now, trying to wend our way through all these bills in our citizen legislature. But let me ask you this, and from your perspective as a freshman representative in the House, you ran in November. Of course, you ran in the primary earlier last year. And what drew you to running for the House of Representatives in this cycle?
You mentioned part of it in those remarks you just made. I found the last session to be embarrassing as an Oregonian. I think we in Salem pay more attention to the legislature than does the rest of the state. As a whole, I'm not saying that we're all fascinated by it, but we're just, the Statesman Journal is more in tune to it, and now our cable TV station picks it up and plays it. So we're just, I think, a little more attuned to it. And as attorneys, you and I are naturally turned into what occurs there. And I've watched the last several sessions. When you teach at Willamette at the law school, you wind up testifying at something at the legislature most every session. So I've been involved probably for the past 8 or 10 years. I watched that last session with a great deal of dismay. I thought that the civility that marks the institution had fallen by the wayside, and I just didn't think that the business of the people was being conducted in a way that was helpful. I complained about this so frequently that my wife finally said, well, you have 2 options. You can either quit complaining or, so it was the or that I accepted. And I'm glad I ran. I've learned a tremendous amount in the short time that I've served the state. And I have come to recognize how much more you gain from the experience as you go through. I, for example, had a very short list of things that I wanted to try and accomplish, and I look at a legislator like yourself, who's been around for several terms, whose list is much longer, much more accomplished, and has had an opportunity to refine the pieces. You know, every time you see a bill that says pre-session filed, for example, you have an illustration that someone was thinking about this not between November 8th and January 9th when we went into session, but in the cool, calm days when rationality may have had more effect.
Well, as we go through this process, can you give us a comparison for how you felt on the campaign trail and all the campaign discussion and promises, and now how you feel now that we're in the delivery phase on these promises into an actual session?
Well, yeah, I'll be glad to do that. The only warning I'll give is I have nothing to compare it to, so it's all first
fresh.
impression.
Well, that's why I'm curious.
I made the mistaken assumption on the campaign trail that there would be two types of decisions that occur in the legislature, those that are political and those that are basically just based upon the best information available. And I had anticipated that the latter category would be the larger, those that are based on the best information. And I find that's not true. That by far the larger categories are those that are political. There are things that we have political positions on that have no bearing being in the political arena, in my estimation. And they stem from allegiances, who's identified with who, and how an issue comes to be in front of it. And I view those things as impediments to rational decision making. One of the bills I introduced was a nonpartisan legislature, and I'm not suggesting that's the right answer, but I am suggesting that at this point, 10 or 11 weeks or how far we are into the session, I still don't have fully what the agenda of this session is. And you know, in my business, I'm paid to come in and help people resolve problems. This isn't how you do it. You don't do it one piece at a time, and you know, it's like, all right, Vanna, I'll take an H and then see where that fits into the puzzle. It's not logical, and I don't think it's a very efficient way to do business.
Well, I'll mention to our audience that you're with us on Capital Insight. I'm State Representative Kevin Mannix from Salem, and I'm your host. Our guest today is Representative Brian Johnston, also from Salem. I guess I could say that I'm from sort of the east, northeast, southeast sector, and Brian is from the southwest, west sector, and you might be able to describe it better than that. I'll mention, folks, that if you ever have any questions or concerns, I hope you feel free to write to me at Capital Insight, H395, State Capitol, Salem, Oregon, 97310. We're always happy to hear from you. Shifting back a little bit to impressions, I am in it's hard to believe, my fourth session, fourth term, and looking at planning ahead for a session. My reflection would be, based on the experience side, that it is amazing how personalities become embroiled in the politics, even among the Democrats or the Republicans, and even how committee agendas seem to be shaped more by the personality of the chair than necessarily by any policy direction, except for maybe the major issues that come up. How have you felt about that in terms of your own committee service and whether or not you see certain issues you'd like to see come to the fore?
All institutions are a result of who the people are. You know, people like to think of these things as that's government, but government is people. And why I mention that is because you're exactly right. There are different committee chairs who have a different approach to things, and some of the personality, I don't want to say gamesmanship, but the natural interaction of people results in some friction. Some of it necessary, some of it not. You were the victim of some of that recently yourself. The stalking bill that is, I know, very near and dear to your heart, is going to pass. It's going to come out. There's no question about it. And yet the speed with which that's moving is, I think, a statement of powers not necessarily reflective of the quality of the legislation. Is that adequately diplomatic?
Well, I think that's quite diplomatic. I tend to be a little more blunt about some things. I'm being taught a lesson right now. The bill's being held up, at least as we're speaking now, because I was a naughty boy and I dared to intervene and with a Judiciary Subcommittee and convince certain members of the Judiciary Subcommittee to go a certain way, and other people didn't like that, and I won't get into the personalities, but my attitude is we all ought to be so involved in the process, but some people don't like that. That happens.
Well, and so in that case, if it happens, if it follows exactly, as you outlined it, maybe it's inappropriate. There are other cases where it's occurring, and it's just a function of the partisanship that I talked about earlier. I have 4 bills, for example, in front of one committee, and I got a message from the committee chair and went and talked to him, and his problem was that he liked some of my bills, but he didn't know that he could hear them, because if he hears mine, he'll be hearing them ahead of some members of his party. And although mine might have, merit that in his eyes was higher than some of these others, he couldn't do that out of an artificial protocol. So, that's the institutional piece, and I think you've managed to be very successful at moving around that, and I'm sure if my ideas are worthwhile, they will be too, and I'm not too worried about it.
Well, one of the ways you address that is through creative amending. I will mention that, for instance, before the Republicans came into control of the House, when a number of us would align ourselves with the Republican, with the Democrat, to co-sponsor some pieces of legislation before the election and agree that we were going to do this together, thinking that, well, not knowing what the end result would be, we'll both be on this bill together, and one way or another, then the party won't matter and the merits of the bill will matter. The problem that arose, interestingly enough, is last session, the majority changed the rules so that you could not pre-session file, well, not pre-session file, but once the session starts, they didn't list the names. So people got out of the habit of lining themselves up, and they're getting back in the habit again this session, because the rules have been changed again, to name the sponsors on the bill. But it was very useful to name sponsors, because you would have Republicans and Democrats getting together ahead of time saying, well, let's line ourselves up. Again, we're seeing that with bills again, but it's been a process of returning to that, and that was to avoid the partisanship. The one way you can get around it this time is amending. That is talking to somebody who's got a good bill and seeing if they'd like to take your idea from another bill that's not moving and amend it into that good little bill. You have to swallow your pride and be result-oriented and say, it doesn't matter whose name is on it, but let's get this thing done.
Someone, a good friend of mine, shared with me some remarks from Senator Philip Hart of Michigan. Said you can get 85% of what you want done if you're willing to follow 2 simple rules. Don't worry about getting the credit, and if a problem arises, step up to take the blame. And I think that's good advice, and I'm trying to follow it.
Now, as you go through this process, what impact has this legislative session had on your personal life, how you handle things for family and community and that?
Well, it's much more difficult than I had anticipated. And I don't mean difficult in terms of, hard carrying the books or anything, but time consuming. In my job, I left the law school in June of '91 and do a lot of work, but the good thing is there's a lot of work to do. The bad thing is much of it's out of state. So when I ran for the office, one thing I did promise my family was, well, look, I'll be home more, actually. And it hasn't turned out to be the case. I have early morning meetings, 6:30, 7 o'clock morning meetings, and frequently don't get home till 7:30, 8 o'clock, sometimes 9 o'clock at night. And when I do get home, I'm still behind in some reading I wanted to do. A colleague of mine who served in the Georgia legislature said, I have a surefire way for you to gain power in the legislature, Brian. And I said, what's that? And he said, read the bills. You'll be surprised how few of your colleagues take the time to read the bills. So I'm at least trying to do that with the bills that are in front of me. And it's just an all-encompassing, all-consuming job. I try not to let that eat into the weekend time, and I'm really good about, or at least I'm trying to be really good about making sure we have family time. But the reality is that it certainly hasn't been the slow, easy road that I might have thought it might have been.
Well, while I'm not in the habit of usually sharing tips during this show, I'll pass on something that I did when I was on Judiciary, and since you're on Judiciary, may prove helpful. If you take a look ahead at the bills that are set for the next week or so and look at the relating clauses, and then you take a look at some things that you think you would like to do, you might be amazed to find how whipping up a genteel amendment or two to some of those bills as they're coming into work session is one way to get things implemented. A lot of members think that they can't touch a bill unless they're dealing just with the exact topic of the bill, but the relating clause is sometimes fairly generous, and we're limited by a relating clause, a description of what the bill does for the benefit of our audience as to what you can put into the bill. But if you talk to the sponsors and you've got something that they think is innocuous, that's not going to harm its passage, it's amazing what you can do. One of my favorite pieces of legislation which allowed community concerns to be addressed more strongly in liquor licensing was the result of an amendment to, I even remember the Senate bill number, Senate Bill 126. It came over from the Senate in the '91 session. Senator Shoemaker was the sponsor, and he was doing something entirely different that everybody agreed on. He got nervous when I suggested bringing this community concerns piece, but we showed how it wasn't going to damage passage of the bill, and we just amended it on in judiciary. Now, the beauty of judiciary, it seems to me, would be that you have so many bills that come up there, and they do cover a pretty broad range. Well, instead of me preaching to you about it, what's been your experience this session with the bills coming up in judiciary?
Well, you're right on the scope of the, I don't have another committee to compare it to really, but the breadth of material that comes through the judiciary is near amazing. The only bill that surprised me that didn't go through judiciary was one of yours that I voted yes on just the other day, and that was the opening up of public lands by extending to them some protection that they don't, private lands, excuse me. By extending to them some protections that they don't currently have, so that some people can use those lands. That one struck me as something that might have perhaps been well looked at in judiciary.
And actually, there is a relating clause that was artfully drafted on that bill relating to land, and the referral was artfully done. And I will tell you, since the event is over in the House, it was done so that the bill would not go to judiciary, because I was afraid of what might happen to it among lawyers. We had an interesting debate about that bill on the floor, and I prefer to deal with it in a natural resources context than in a legal context. We'll see how that plays out in the Senate, where I think adjustments can be made. But sometimes in playing this political game, you worry about whether a bill will even get a hearing in a certain committee, and you know it might receive a warmer reception in another committee. Part of the political game we have to play is trying to figure out what committee a bill will go to. And every session, you never know who's going to be chair, who are going to be the members of the team even. It's like trying to guess who's going to be winning the NBA championship when you don't know who the players are yet.
And that takes us almost full circle to my observations about the lack of a unified agenda. Notwithstanding the party division, one of the ways the legislature tries and organize itself is at the conclusion of session, as you well know, people get appointed to interim committees. And they do these committees between sessions, and they're developing work product that they think will be introduced at the next session. But as a practical matter, what occurs is the session ends in June or August. Interim committees are appointed. They work on something for the next 12, 14 months, however long it takes. They have a product. Then the election cycle is held, and then maybe some of those same people are back, maybe they're not. Maybe they're on the same committees, maybe they're not. And if they're not on those committees, or the party in power changes, the odds of that agenda being the agenda of the newly elected majority, whichever party it is, slight. I've seen some bills come in from the interim this time that are treated with derision rather than welcomeness. And it just strikes me that there's a better way to organize this thing to accomplish more, especially since taxpayers paid for all that interim work.
You could almost say that we have a system that's dysfunctionally designed right now in terms of agenda setting.
I think that's right.
Now, what do you think of these proposals that come forward and have come forward again this session to say, well, we ought to come back for a short special session next year after doing some interim work, knowing that the same players will be on board?
I like those. I also like the ones that argue instead for an approach that says, when the election's held, we come in, get organized, then go into what is the equivalent of the interim session, then have the session right prior to in the year prior to the election, so that what happens is you come out of session in June of the election year, and go straight into an election. You're standing on your record, with your record being quite fresh in the minds of the voting populace. It's another way of looking at a way to do it.
As you go through this session, and then you take a look at what you've been able to do so far and what you still see coming down the pike, are there some things that you are reflecting on now that you feel good about, that you feel like talking about, or are there still things that are too much in tumult?
No, I have one piece that I think that I can say at this point that I'm not sure how it's going to come out, but I think that my being there has contributed to its development at least. When the tort reform movement began, tort reform is that movement to modify the ways in which some of the complaints are handled in courts. When that came up, it was initially, I think, quite punitive, designed to prevent access to the courts. And I think in a number of ways, whatever passes will be more constructive rather than simply destructive. You know, you and I, and I'm sure your listening population would agree that we all want to get rid of frivolous things that shouldn't be in there. But at the same time, we all want a man and woman in this country who's injured to have an opportunity in court to see if the person they think is the cause of it is indeed the cause. And if they're not, then we should proceed our separate ways. I've been able to help move that into what our court system has been calling 2020, its vision for the next century, and helping to shape that in a way that I think will be more facilitative of the courts moving in a more modern direction.
As we go through the rest of this session, then, are there some follow-through things? I know tort reform is still churning, but are there other follow-through things that you would like to see the session focus on in terms of major or minor issues?
You know, I find myself, as I grow older, being much more attuned to process. And I wish that the legislature were, you and I have talked about some of the reforms that are currently circulating and that have circulated before, but I wish the legislature was seriously considering looking at its process. I think we have a number of things that are systemically designed to prevent good decision-making. You know, you were talking a moment ago about artfully referring something to committee and moving this way. I think, Kevin, that's one of your great strengths. You have an acute understanding of the system and are able to move things through and to achieve what you want. That's not shared. There aren't that many folks, at least maybe there are and I'm just not aware of it, but I don't see as many people understanding the system and using it as well as you. And I'm not quite convinced that we should all have to be experts in systematology to get things done.
Well, I would agree with you on that. In fact, I think I spend an inappropriate amount of energy, well, inappropriate in terms of the system, appropriate in terms of what I have to do, trying to figure out how to play the system to get results rather than just dealing with the merits of the issues. Yeah. And wouldn't you say that there's a certain amount of development of a system designed to allow politicians to duck issues that they're uncomfortable with so that they never come up for a vote, nobody has to take responsibility?
Oh, absolutely. The same thing is true with, you know, one of the things I introduced was this bill cap. You and I had discussed that earlier. And one of the things I heard from lots of folks is, well, you know, you can't do that. A citizen comes to me and wants to have a bill introduced, I introduce it. I'm his or her gateway to the system. And I said, well, is it a good bill? No, they say. They smile and they say, you know, this dog won't hunt. And I said, what happens to it after it gets introduced? Well, it goes to a committee and dies. Well, where's the personal accountability for introducing that bill? It costs all of us taxpayers $400 or $500 for you to do that, and it's not. It doesn't send a good message because you've probably told the constituent, you know, I tried that, but Joe Smith won't hear your bill. That's not responsible.
I'd add, by the way, that I don't introduce bills at the request of people unless I personally agree with the proposal. And I've always said every legislator should be required to be able to explain in 30 seconds or less what a particular bill is all about before they file it. And I'd be willing to take that task on. Sometimes I wonder if everybody would be willing to do that. But in any event, I'll give you just last 10 seconds. Do you think you'll run again?
The evidence isn't in yet. For me, that question can only be answered taking a look at what I've done and what it's cost me and weighing those and saying, was what I've done helpful to the system or not, helpful to my family or not? How do I balance those off?
I hope you can balance things off, because I think our audience will be able to tell that you're articulate and intelligent. We can use that in politics. And for all of you who've joined us, I hope you agree with my perception of Brian Johnston, our guest. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Kevin. Certainly enjoyed it.